Steve Nash, Chief Executive of the Institute of the Motor Industry, and I'm here with Emma Carrigy, who oversees all of our research. And one of the key pieces of research that Emma does on an annual basis is what we call a baseline report. And this is a snapshot, but a very important snapshot of where we are from a people perspective in the whole of the automotive sector.
At the IMI, we're quite different in the fact that most professional bodies tend to look at a precise profession or...
So like Institute of Chartered Accountants or
Exactly.
Law Society or whatever, yeah.
Absolutely, but we look after a whole sector, which can mean various subsectors, various different occupations. With the baseline report, I don't want to get all too techie, but with the baseline, some of the data we use government data using what's called SIC and SOC codes.
Yeah.
So, which is great in the fact that it's government and industry recognised, but it does have some limitations, which is just what I wanted to highlight. It doesn't go down to real granular data in some instances. So, for example, we could look at heavy vehicle technicians, but they don't have their own code. They're included within the whole technicians.
Right.
Some of that finer levels.
So you have to use a bit of background intelligence to kind of define a number. Yeah, no, I get that.
Key figures are that we actually have 578,000 jobs in the automotive retail sector. There are 163,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector. And if you also include occupations, specific automotive occupations that are employed outside of the sector, I'm thinking like heavy vehicle technicians employed direct by supermarkets to maintain their fleets, for example.
Yeah.
If you add all of those together, it's another 100,000 jobs. So add that all together, we are, our sector is 844,000 jobs.
Yeah, and I mean those are people that we can say directly work for the sector. So as with any sector, really, I mean, that doesn't tell you how many local employers depend on, so if you've got a factory that's building cars, the local shops that serve that factory and all those kind of things. So you could say that we influence probably comfortably over 1 million livelihoods, couldn't you?
Absolutely, and it's estimated that the sector's worth over 37 billion gross value to the UK economy. So if you look in the last 2 years where the pandemic's obviously really bitten, all subsectors have decreased by some degree. However, there are 3 subsectors in the manufacturing area that actually grown over the last 2 years. However, all of those that have not involved microchips. So yeah. I'm talking, so growth has been in the manufacture of motorcycles and other parts and bodies. That's where the growth has been.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The whole microchip thing. I mean, we do know that when the pandemic hit, quite naturally, the production facilities most of them closed down, and the manufacturers actually told their chip suppliers, "We don't need your chips for the moment." That corresponded with there being an upsurge in the purchase of computers, gaming systems, and all those things that people were using at home. And when auto manufacturers went back to the suppliers were saying, well, actually, we've got new markets for these chips. In some cases, they're spending more with us than you were. So that's been a problem. But I mean, I think there are other issues as well, of course. I mean, I think the chips are the things that everybody talks about, but supply of aluminium, other raw materials has been tight, steel, and of course, the conflict in Ukraine is having other effects as well, wiring harnesses we've heard about, and so on. So there remain some bottlenecks, don't there, in manufacturing? But what about on the retail side of the business?
Yeah, so if you look over the past decade, actually there's been real strong growth across all bar 2 subsectors.
Yeah.
And in particular, there's been two really strong growth areas, and that's been the sale of other motor vehicles, which has increased by 47% over the last 10 years.
But that's probably quite a small sector, isn't it?
Yeah, so small numbers, but in terms of percentage,
big growth.
Big growth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and renting and leasing of vehicles as well has increased by 31% over the last.
Now that doesn't surprise me so much, because that sort of fits in with the whole mobility piece. So when we talk about ACEs, as we call it, autonomous, connected, electric, and shared, I guess. The rental and leasing bit has, is seeing some growth in that latter piece, the shared mobility piece.
Yeah.
But again, that's good to know, because they're big fleet operators, the rental and leasing people, aren't they? So. But the pandemic has had its effect, hasn't it? So I understand there were 65,000 fewer jobs now than there were in 2019. But actually the number of work age people that haven't come back into the workplace is actually worryingly high, isn't it?
Yep.
People who've just decided to have a bit of a change of life or whatever since the pandemic, maybe pursue different things. But that accounts to a sort of 2% fall in the last year alone. And we know, of course, that automotive has record high vacancies at the moment, something like 23,000 vacancies.
Yeah, 20-year record high.
Yeah, which is and we also know that's reflected across all other sectors as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not just an automotive problem, but it is a problem for automotive, because and I know we'll come on to this, but we have to find people to fill those kind of roles. This is an interesting one, isn't it? Because this as well as being a sort of snapshot of where we are today, it perhaps points to where some of our challenges and opportunities are going forward, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So what the baseline profile outlines is that 38% of the automotive sector is aged under 35, and 18% are over the age of 55. And again, things vary by subsector, as you would imagine. So the sector with the youngest profile is the manufacture of motorcycles, where actually 51% of that sector is under the age of 35.
Okay, that's interesting.
And the sale of other motor vehicles has the oldest profile, with 26% over the age of 55.
Well, I mean, it is interesting. I think flipping back to some of the numbers we talked about earlier, so we talked about the challenge, the talent challenge, really. Record number of vacancies, 23,000 vacancies, a 20-year high, you said?
Yes,
20-year high in vacancies. So where the hell do we get the talent from? And we've not traditionally had a terribly diverse sector, have we? It's tended to be a male-dominated environment. So even just the male-female split has not been anything like it could or ideally should have been. Huge opportunity there. I think females make up slightly more than half the population now. It clearly points to the fact that if you continue to fish in the same pond and it's not that big a pond, then you're going to be the problems you have in finding talent are going to be even greater. But I think it's far bigger than that, isn't it? So that's where our diversity task force, or should I say equity, diversity and inclusion task force, has been looking at the three key areas of gender in its broadest sense, race and ethnicity, and both visible and invisible disabilities. I think the only area where we're slightly overrepresented, which in itself actually is a revelation that's important, is in invisible disabilities, isn't it? Things like neurodiversity, things like dyslexia. It's pretty clear, isn't it, that we, not only because we haven't had a particularly diverse workforce in the past, and we have to fish in the entire pond rather than, even then it's still a challenge because the entire economy has challenges in finding people, We move forward with the changes in technology, potential changes to the distribution model through agency and so on. New skills, new talents are going to be needed. I know on the manufacturing side, one of our non-exec directors was saying that they now employ a huge force of software engineers who are a completely different demographic to your typical automotive industry. They're younger, they're extremely diverse. So the times they are changing.
They are changing.
Our existence for 102 years, we've been here to establish and to help people attain and maintain professional standards, haven't we? But yet there's been no regulation behind that. So in essence, anyone could set themselves up to service and repair and maintain vehicles. But that will inevitably change going forward, won't it? And that's what IMI TechSafe was all about, wasn't it? It was around the ACEs piece, or probably more specifically the ACE, the autonomous, connected and electric. So we know that there is regulation around people working on electric cars, don't we? And that it is necessary for people to be able to prove their credentials to work safely on an electric car or an electrified vehicle of any kind under the Electricity at Work Act. We know that there is a cyber security regulation going through around connected cars, which inevitably has an impact on those who work on them from a data protection point of view and so on. And then there's also new regulation coming around vehicles with autonomous systems. So I know that the Law Society have given an opinion that says that any vehicle that is driving itself in accordance with factory specifications, that might be a version of adaptive cruise control with automatic lane keeping or whatever, but where you're actually permitted to have your hands off and your feet off and possibly even your eyes off briefly, the manufacturer is then responsible if something happens in that situation. And I know from coming from an OEM background that the first thing you do is say, well, who's worked on it? Who's touched it since it left the factory? Yeah. And that leads on to other elements of TechSafe, which is appropriate qualifications for people working on autonomous and connected vehicles as well. Autonomous in its broadest sense, that's including, as we already have, ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems. I know you've been tracking our progress against the forecasts for EV or electrified vehicle registrations. We've sort of taken a stake in the ground at 2030, haven't we?
We have.
And obviously that being the point at which you're no longer able to sell pure internal combustion engine cars, and we've been tracking the sort of qualification of people on electrified vehicles. So current status?
So current status, we've got more than 28,000 we believe EV trained technicians, which is around 13% of technicians, which is good, and we've had really strong growth, especially in the last year or so.
So post-pandemic, basically.
Yeah. Mainly driven by the huge uptake of purchasing of electric vehicles. May's new registrations had that 3 in every 10 new registrations were electrified, and for the first time ever, used EVs were selling as fast as petrol and diesel. So for the first,
it's pretty clear that one manufacturer after another is committing down the electric route, aren't they? I mean, there may be a bit of hydrogen in there, which we're also covering in TechSafe, of course, along with our sector advisory group. But I think people are beginning to realise now that this is real, and actually the volumes are growing at such a rate that there's work opportunity there.
Absolutely. And lots of people are now taking, so first quarter of 2022 was a record number who took electric vehicle qualifications. just over 3,600 just in that quarter, and that's not just IMI qualifications. That's across the piece. And in fact, the most awarded qualification in the first quarter was a level 3 award in electric and hybrid vehicle systems. So,
which says a lot, doesn't it? I mean, to put that into perspective, I think we alone have something like 600 automotive qualifications. When you think of other awarding organisations that also operate in the automotive space, to be the number one, most taken qualification, that's quite a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think we're definitely seeing a sea change, but there's still, so we reckon there needs to be, as things stand, and it's a moving feast, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's a moving feast, but based on current predictions of the numbers of electrified vehicles that will be on the road by 2030, and we think that sort of electrified sales will probably catch up with non-electrified sales by about 25, 26, something like that.
Yeah.
So it'll be 50-50, and then very rapidly, obviously, climb towards 100% in 2030.
Yeah.
But we believe that out of the sort of roughly 250,000 technicians that we know exist out there, about 90,000 of them are going to need to be qualified by 2030. Obviously grow beyond that, but how are we doing against that target at the moment?
So if we carry on with our current trajectory, we have a potential skills deficit at around 2028, and that's just at the moment. So as you just said, it's a moving feast. So if that end point increases, so does that potential crossing point come nearer.
So we know at the moment we appear to be on a bit of an upward trajectory of people taking the qualifications, but of course if the projection for the number of vehicles also goes up, then I mean, having said that, based on current numbers, the gap has moved from 2026 to 2028, hasn't it? Which is a positive thing.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a positive thing, but it's really a changing world, isn't it? So we're looking at a world in which, as I've already said, historically, we have got and always have had some very highly qualified people in our sector, but we've also had a lot of people working out there who actually weren't very highly qualified. And actually the general public didn't really know the difference, did they? I mean, they would generally shop on price and convenience, but I think we are now entering a world where people with, autonomous, connected and electrified vehicles in any mix are going to want to know that the people working on those cars have the appropriate qualifications. Absolutely. And those people themselves would be taking huge risks, the employers and the employees, if they undertake that work without being appropriately qualified, because they could open themselves up to, prosecution. So we definitely know that with electrified vehicles, the Health and Safety Executive would enforce the Electricity at Work Act. So we're looking at a world where it's not across the board licensing, but the key pieces of work that people will be doing going forward, you will need to be qualified for. So you could say it's sort of licensing by osmosis in a way. You'll certainly need, that's what TechSafe is all about, isn't it? It's your IMI TechSafe accredited, but visibly you're accredited for EV at a certain level, maybe ADAS at a certain level, perhaps autonomous and connected as well. That's the way it will be going forward. But a changing world, isn't it? And it's a great piece of work, though, Emma. It always is, the baseline report, and I'd really strongly commend it to people to have it's available on our website, isn't it?
Yep, so we have a summary report that's available to everybody, so please go on the research section of the website, and for those who are members, you can access a full version, which I highly recommend. Become a member and get the full version.
Well, there you go. There's always a benefit to being an IMI member, of course.
Absolutely.
But for the record, www.theimi.org.uk is the website. And as I said, it's a very, very interesting read, and I commend that report to you. Thanks, Emma. That was really good.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much.
Thank you.